Hi, it's Richard Dunn from Evoker. Welcome back to the second part in this particle tutorial on making the fire. So this is what we've got so far, and I'm thinking that the fire needs to still be a little bit bigger as it grows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to up these values a little bit more. Let's try 9 and 7. Yeah, it looks a little bit better to me. Now the next thing we want to do, as we talked about before, was we want to try and spread out where it's birthed from. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to go location, cylinder. Now what it's doing is it's now spawning from a piece of geometry that's actually invisible to us. So if we click on this and we scroll all the way down and we turn on 3D draw mode, we can see this is what it's spawning from. Obviously it's a little bit too big. So what we're going to do is we're going to change that down to about 5, and we're going to set the height to something a little bit better as well, like 25 or even 20. Let's try 34. Here we go. So that's starting to look a little bit more realistic. But you can see it's still spawning from within inside the torch, and we're getting this cut off where the fire is actually coming through the geometry. Now there are some effects that we can do inside the material to stop this penetrating, such as depth biased alpha and things like that. They can be kind of heavy in some games, and certainly in mobile games it's not really an option. There's another little thing that we can do in here which simulates the effect. Now given that this fire and this torch stick are always relative to the camera, we can shift this fire closer to the camera to kind of start to obscure this torch, which does the same thing but very, very cheaply. And the way we can achieve that is by what's called camera offset. So if we right click, camera offset, let's give this a really insane value, 500. Now it's actually gone behind the camera. Let's try 100. Now it's better, but it's still too much. So let's try 80. Better, it's starting to look like it's burning around the globe. Let's go down to about 65. Yeah, 50. Just got to play until you're happy with it. I'm pretty happy with about 50. So what that's left us with is pretty close to being pretty acceptable fire in most cases. Obviously it could do with a little bit of tweaking in here, which is where most of the time is spent. It's up to you really to get in there and make it look how you want it to look. Any of these settings can be used to sculpt or shape the effect how you want to do it. So this is what I would call a basic fire, a basic flame particle effect. But what we're going to do next is we're actually going to take this to the next level. We're going to take it to the professional production standard by adding some stuff to the material. So what we're going to do now is we're going to exit out of here and we're going to jump into the material editor. So what we'll do is we'll shut our particle editor and we'll open up the material, and this is what we had for our material, if you remember. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to distort these textures by some other textures. Now I want to take you through the process of making these textures. There's two that we need. We need a bit plane texture, which you may remember I mentioned, which is 3 different types of texture within one texture. And the other thing we need to do is make a frame clamp, which is actually going to mask each flame with a border so that the distortion doesn't spill into an adjacent texture. It's a way of containing the effect on each of these 4 frames. So what we'll do is we'll open up Photoshop, and we're going to create, first of all, the noise texture. So what I'll get you to do is go File, New. We'll make this 512 by 512. As long as this is black and white, it doesn't matter which way around it is. And what we're going to do is we're just going to highlight the red channel, and we're going to go Filter, Render, Clouds. And as you can see, it's giving us a pattern. And all we need to do to repeat that is Control F. So just Control F until you find something that's got lots of variation in it. That one there's pretty good. Just keep cycling through until you find something that's got a lot of breakup in it. That one there will do me. Come to the next one, Control F, and turn off the red one if you like. Or something with a bit of dark in the middle. That one there will do. Turn that one off, Control F. And that. So what we end up with is this multicolored effect to break everything up. But what I want to do is one step further on the red. I want to go Filter, Noise, Median. And we'll just isolate that so you can see what it's doing. And this is just going to band it. It's going to give us a slightly softer blurred effect. And we'll go to about there. This isn't incredibly important. It's artistic. So just try different things and see what you like. But what we've got there now is a pretty good starting point for a breakup, a noise breakup that's tileable. So what we're going to do now is we're going to export that. So we're going to save that, and we're going to call that, save it as Targa. We're going to call that random underscore noise, and just save that. It's 24 bits because it doesn't have an alpha channel. So that's one texture that we need. So we'll shut that. Actually, we'll leave it open for now. We'll create a new one. Now this, we're going to use white. And actually no, we're going to use the background color. And we're going to keep it 512 as well. And what we're going to do then is we're going to come down to our shapes. Press and hold, and we want rounded rectangle. And what we're going to do now is we're going to hold shift, and we're just going to drag out a rounded rectangle, which should fill with white. Now if it doesn't fill with white, you need to look at your settings up here. Your stroke in anything up here could possibly be the reason for it not to work, in case you do have any issues. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to go Edit, Free Transform Path, and we want to just snap this shape to the perimeter. And then what we're going to do is we're going to hold down Shift and Alt, and we're going to just drag that in. And as you can see, what it's doing is it's scaling it from the center to give us a nice even border. When you're happy with that, press Enter. And then with that done, we'll go Blur, Gaussian Blur, Shape must be rasterized. Now a quick description. What we're dealing with here with a shape is a vector. Now vector is a mathematically calculated solid color. A rasterized image is pixels. So what it's saying here is that in order for it to be blurred, it needs to be pixels. So do you want to convert this to a raster? Yes. And there's our settings. Now what we need to do here is we can blur it as much as we want, but we must have perfect black at the edge. So we can bring this up like so, but then we need to check that the edge values are black. So if we turn on our info and we just come here, we can see here that in fact our edges are black. In fact, they change there. So we have a fair amount of black. We could blur it a little bit more, but that's fine. So with that's done, we'll now save that out as a target as well. And we'll call this frame underscore clamp. Like so. 24 bits, yes. And with that done, what we want to do is come back into the content browser and we want to import those two textures. So we'll go import frame clamp and random noise together. Neither of them have alphas, so compression no alpha. Frame clamp, that's the package. The group is a texture. Okay. Next one, texture, random noise, compression no alpha. That's fine as well. And we can right click, save. And there is all the textures that we need for the fire at this stage. So what we'll do now is we'll just bring that over to the side and we'll bring in our material editor and just get that in there so we can see what we're doing. And we need to get these in, so we'll just drag that one in and we'll drag that one in and we'll minimize that. And now we're ready to start really getting some interesting effects in here. So the first thing we want to do is create a means of distorting the UVs of the fire. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a copy of this, so Control W. And then we're going to get an add by pressing A. And we're going to plug that into the back of the UVs. Now we're going to hit a multiply onto that. So we're going to hold M and we're going to click and we're going to plug that into B. Now we need a texture coordinate to add to. So we're going to go into texture coordinate. Plug that into A. And what we're going to do here is we're actually going to multiply another multiply and a constant. So hold down 1 and type in 1 for that. Now give this a little note. Call this what should we call it? We'll call it curve UV. So you can see what it's doing. Now if we turn these on so we can actually see the effect. We're not going to see anything yet because we haven't actually done anything, but we're just getting prepared. What we need to do is then add another multiply and plug that into the A of that multiply, and we need another constant, and we need to name this one temporarily random UV. Now these are all going to be parameters that we can control within the actual particle system eventually using a very, very powerful little node called a dynamic parameter. What we need to do now is add an append. into the A, and we need that mask texture that we've just created. We're going to plug that. Now here we go again about the RGB. We've created a 24-bit RGB texture that has nothing more than black and white data. So if we plug in this, it'll work fine, but it's using 24 bits. The same data exists in the red channel. So if we do that, we're now only using 8 bits. Just another way of saving memory. We also need another texture coordinate on there, so we'll Control W that one. And because we now need to frame our fire, we need to set this up to tile this around the fire. So we want to set that to 4. And 1. Now the next thing we want to do is grab that noise that we made. And we're going to create 2 variations of this noise panning across the fire to disrupt the UVs. So we're going to select, say, we'll go with blue, and we'll choose green. It really doesn't matter. You can try different combinations of that to get the look that you want. And then we want panners to pan this or scroll this texture across this one. So let's hold down P and Control W and plug those in. Now you're going to start to see, if we turn on real time, what these values will actually do once we put something in them. This one here we'll put in 0.4 and 1.4. Now this can take time. I've predefined these values, so I know they work, but this does take time to figure out values that work. And this one we'll go with 0.5 and 1.2. And here's what's happening. We have an effect masked by this frame. Now the last step to this is we need another texture coordinate, and we need to set that to 4 and 1.5, and we want to plug that into the coordinate of both. And last of all, we need to multiply time, so we need time by a dynamic parameter. So at this stage we'll use a constant as a stand-in. We'll give this a name of random speed. And we'll multiply time by random speed into both time slots. Now that is effectively what's distorting the UVs, as you can see here. If we right click, preview node on mesh, this is what we've done to our fire, which, as you can see, is going to look considerably more realistic. than what we have there now, because we are adding a fluidish effect to the fire. So we'll stop watching that. Then we'll create a comment around this. So just Control Alt drag, right click Offer Node, new comment, and we'll call this distortion. Now you can select that node and move everything. So what needs to happen to this now is we need to make some changes to the way we've set this up. So we need to take this away. And we need to hook up a multiply into emissive, multiplied by vert color, and then we need what's called a constant bias scale. And we're going to plug that into A. Now we need that noise texture that we created before with a panner, so we'll grab both of those. Control W, we'll drag that all the way down to here, and we'll plug that into the constant bias scale, and we'll set the panner to 0.5 and 3. And what we're going to do then is we're going to multiply a particle macro. So if we type in particle macro UV by a texture coordinate, which we'll grab from here, Control W, we'll set that to 5 and 2. And we're going to multiply those against each other and plug that into coordinate. So the last thing we need to do now is simply hook up most of this stuff here. So we could plug this straight in here now, and that's what we'd get. But there's a couple of things it still needs. We want to add some contrast so we can get a different kind of fire effect, and to do that we do a standard type of contrast configuration, which is what's called power by a number. So we'll plug that into the base, we'll plug that into B, and we'll create another constant such as these, and we'll call this contrast. And we'll plug that into exponent. And then the last thing we need to do is multiply that by a component mask, and we want to mask out G. Is Y. And we're going to plug that into there. And we're going to set that to 1 and 1. And as you can see, that is a very, very lightweight system. We have only 3 textures and 24 instructions, which is virtually free. It has virtually no cost whatsoever. So let's compile that. Now by changing these values, you can see how it's affecting the fire. Now we have a much thinner effect. So what we want to do now is make these parameters so that they can be accessed within the actual particle system. And there's a really new, neat node for this, which is called dynamic parameter. And what we need to do is we need to create names in here that correspond with what we've done here. So what we'll do is we'll come in here and we'll call this one random speed. And we'll call the next one curve UV. And the next one random UV. And the last one contrast. So we need to now just take these and swap these out with the constants that we had. Now, just a word of warning, these are set by default to 0. So once we hook these up, the effect will no longer be visible. And we have random UV, so we'll plug that in there. Contrast into there. And then last of all, we can take the curve UV and plug that one into there. So we now have our finished fire material. So we'll compile that and minimize it, and we'll come back to our particle editor. Now you can see now that it's gone pretty crazy. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new parameter called dynamic. Now we've added dynamic, which in case you're looking is under parameter, so dynamic. And what we're going to do, if we open this up, we see we have parameters here, but they don't have any names as yet. They're just default parameters. So what we do is we right click, refresh module. Now you can see they have names: curve UV, random UV, contrast. And random speed, because that's open. There we go. Now you can see them all. Random speed, curve UV, contrast. Now the reason this has gone strange is because everything is set to 0. So what we need to do now is go through these one by one and get some settings in here that work. So we'll start with random speed. And we really want two values there. We want a min and a max. So we'll come down to float uniform and we'll try 0.8 and 2.2. And for contrast, let's try 1. And let's see what happens as we go through. 2, 3. You see it's starting to get more gaseous. We go 5. Starting to get a lot more of a detailed fire. Go all the way to 10 and it'll look a bit weird. But it's almost a gaseous type of... 2 looks about right. So that's our contrast set. So what we're going to do is play with the random UV, which is what we were doing. We're going to set it to float uniform, and we need some figures in here just to break up the way that it's spawning. You want to keep these figures low. So let's try minus 0.07, and let's try the other side of that, 0.07. And we just want to tick, to stop this fluttering, we want to stick spawn time only. So the next one we want to look at is the curve UV, and we want to set that one to float constant curve, and we want to set 2 points. So we click this green plus sign twice. We'll set the first lot of points with an out value that's very low, so we'll set it at 0.2, and we'll go to the next point and we'll set that 1 and 1. Now we can close that down. So we've got our random speed, which we've done. We've got our curve UV, which we've just done. Our random UV, which we've done as well. And our contrast. Which is just how detailed our fire is. And that pretty much wraps it up. Now there is a couple of things you can do. You can add another initial velocity to it on top of this and completely randomize the fire to give it even more breakup. You will more than welcome to try and figure that out for yourself. But you simply can add another one of these in there and just break up the values and sculpt it in the graph editor. So that's something that you can try. But that there is a pretty reasonable fire. It can be changed, of course. We can come in and we can actually make this a completely different color. For instance, I can show you that now quickly. We could make that 10 and 55 and just switch it around the other way. And now we have a sort of magical green flame. This is why we use grayscale instead of using color. It gives us the power to be able to do that. So in the next session we'll get on with making the embers that will fly off this, little sparks and things. And we'll get on to that next.